Good afternoon, everyone. We're excited to get started today with our live briefing, A Talent Pipeline for Economic Statecraft, brought to you by the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. My name is Madeline Field, and I'm an assistant editor at War in the Rocks, where I work on our Cogs of War vertical, which focuses on defense tech and the industrial base. So this is the ninth in our live briefing series assessing the economic statecraft problem set as a core national security domain. These webinars are based on our ongoing 11-part article series in War on the Rocks titled War by Other Ledgers. So today we'll be discussing how to build an academic and workforce development pipeline for economic statecraft. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Jen Buss, the CEO of the Potomac Institute.
Thanks, Maddie. It's great to be here.
So everyone, we will be doing a live Q&A at the end of the session. So do put your questions in the chat as we go. And it will also be uploaded on YouTube later, so you can watch that. But I think we have a lot to cover, so let's jump right in. So your article was excellent, but I do want to play devil's advocate first right off the bat. So why can't we just keep doing business as usual, accidentally acquiring knowledge and figuring out how to do economic statecraft kind of on the fly? Why does it need to be formalized into an academic domain or be professionalized?
Great question. And you teed me up perfectly with an answer in your question, and it wasn't on purpose, but it's this accidentally stumbling upon information that is the biggest challenge that we face. So there's been lots of examples, real world examples for the military, for companies being used and abused for other nation state purposes. And we didn't realize it was happening right in front of us, right? And I use the ethereal plural, royal, we, all of us. And so by having a discipline, having people trained in what to look for, how to categorize it, and who to call, will go a long way in preventing those actions from ever happening, and likely changing the way that we in the national security enterprise are operating so that we can catch them as far left, as far earlier as possible, rather than after they've happened and have to clean up a mess.
So for those who haven't read the article, what types of domains does economic statecraft need to pull in to educate its students, practitioners on?
Thanks. Yeah, I forget sometimes that people haven't read everything, which is funny because I preach that all day. Don't expect me to have read.
Not everyone else's job to read everything.
So economic statecraft broadly includes not just business and economics, but it is the finance, and it is legal platforms, and it is my brain is totally not focused.
I think you wrote like information,
international affairs, all of the foreign policy. So when you think about how universities are structured, all of those are typically not under the same school or college within a major university. And so being able to kind of cross-pollinate those ideas, to have access to them, is difficult when you're going and pursuing a business degree that doesn't require you to take an economics class, which is wrong, but doesn't require you to take a law class. There's a business ethics, and there'll be other associated, but you're not going to go learn IP law as part of it necessarily. And so being able to look at each of those in concert with each other, and understanding how they pull and push on each other, and the ties that are obvious once you've seen them, but very hard as a student to pull it all together. So being able to formalize it, to your point before, is going to be really important to help individuals that haven't had the lived experience of where all of those parts intersect, to pull those ties to make a new set of discoveries or draw new conclusions based on the examples that can be taught in the classroom.
And I know your article mostly focuses on grad programs, professional degrees, but for an undergrad, I had to take a Homeland Security class in college, but it wasn't one of my majors. So why can't all of this just be distilled in one class?
I would love to say this could all be distilled in one class. I would actually, I wrote this whole article, but I think in practice, at least at a start, and I say professional degrees and graduate programs are probably the first if we're looking at timelines. Um, but in a best case scenario, we would have all of this as underpinning core like a speaking platform of everything is rooted in economic security.
Mhm.
And if you think about things that way, then we don't need a specific discipline on it. We need to have some of the right definitions and put towards it. But we're not going to dictate that as a country
Mhm.
for everybody to start embracing economic security. So the way that we do operate here in the country is to be able to formalize it and teach it and structure it in a way that is accessible.
I think this flows into something that you wrote, which is that economic security is difficult to categorize and champion.
Mhm.
So what exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, so to that point of all of these different existing degrees, don't have the common tying thread of economic security.
Hmm.
Whereas you could look at Homeland Security or international affairs or foreign relations type degrees as having a national security um, kind
Bent.
of umbrella, right, theme to them. But you're not seeing that in the business schools operating today.
Yeah.
So the natural champion would be in maybe a Homeland Security program, but it would require outside of the school or that college to be able to see all of the different dimensions that economic security touches.
And in academia, you spent a lot of time in academia. Who is the right champion at a university level, let's say, to start kind of enacting change, pushing things forward?
Um, It'll probably, so much of the economic security and economic statecraft community today is grassroots and ground up. So the most likely is at the professor level, advocating or starting to include economic security um, within their lectures and within their own curriculum that they're teaching. And then expanding that through that one department and gaining a following. That's going to take time to do it that way. Ideally, it's presidents of colleges or deans of that university to stand up and take a stance saying, we are going to focus on this and you're going to see it across all of our programs so that everybody that comes out of this has had the opportunity to hear, learn, understand, at least at some level, that this exists.
So you ground the article in three examples of, academic disciplines that have been spun up out of national security need, and that is cyber, biotech, and semiconductors. So we are still just a couple years out from the CHIPS Act and everything that has flowed from that. So I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about that because you just touch on it briefly in the article, but just to understand what recently has been done and where ES can look.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to actually start with the cybersecurity one.
Yeah, which is a
Um,
great example. We had this webinar in the past and several articles on what a good corollary it is.
Yeah, and if you look at how it evolved as a discipline or evolved as a profession in
Mhm.
cybersecurity, and now there's other adjectives associated with cybersecurity. It's not just cybersecurity anymore. Actually, before it was two separate words, right? And now we've all accepted, okay, that cybersecurity is an entire field in and of
Mhm.
itself. Um, that computer science degrees were first about actually like computing power, which is semiconductors, or the hardware behind compute. And then it became a software, computer engineering. And through time that evolved into a more focused discipline of cybersecurity. And so it's like tiers and levels of how much definition is associated with that topic and category. And so if you look at the evolution of a computer engineering degree um, through today of a cybersecurity, it took universities, it took professors talking about cybersecurity as part of their computer science. It took entire schools having a focus or a uh, center of excellence focused on the cyber aspect of, or the digital aspect at the time. And then understanding the the security aspects and not just encoding the language or encoding the software, but what do I need to make it secure? And security wasn't ever part of anyone's definition or description from the early days. It was, let's get people connected.
It's build. Yeah.
Right. And then security came as an afterthought. And we're seeing the same thing happen in economics, right? It's so much about let's go build the business. Let's make sure that people are invested financially and emotionally in the mission of said company and that it will be profitable. That there is a market and a demand signal for these products and, but there is never a sense of what do I need to do to protect my supply chain or protect from even a cybersecurity perspective, or protect my people who are working in my company. So all of those corollaries on the economic side are now everybody's thinking about what do I need for security here? And so that's how we saw it evolve through into cybersecurity, and that's where we're going to see it come on the economic security side. The biotech example, if I may,
Please.
um, is also really interesting because uh, I have a biochem degree, and at the time, universities were offering chemical biology, chemistry, biology, and occasionally there was a biochem degree. There was always a class in biochem, but it wasn't ever a degree. And today, you can't just, I mean, you can, but the biochem degree is is it bioengineering? And so it's even more nuanced and focused today than it was when I got my undergrad.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
So did that come out of a private, like, was that a private signal? Hey, we need students that are trained in this. Like, where did that shift start happening and why?
Yeah, so I'd say that it came out of an opening in the job market,
Okay.
right? Not necessarily companies saying that they needed that. Just like I think at the very beginning of an AI bubble, if you will, maybe a decade ago, that people didn't have um, job descriptions out for somebody that was an expert in AI, right? But they did have calls out for coders and software engineers and um, machine learning and big data analytics and all of those things, which led to what we now just commonly call AI. Uh, but there's also now degrees out for in AI, right? So it's this, there's a need for it, but it's not explicitly called in a job description. And so people internal to the company start to fulfill those roles, and then they realize that I'm going to need somebody that's seen the world from these different perspectives.
Mhm.
And in doing so, it drives because there's a market, right?
Yeah.
There's a demand signal for those
Always.
types of people, and that's has to start at the root through those universities.
And how do you think that demand gets translated to the university level?
So it's a great point because most of the professors at universities have, at some level, interaction either with industry or a think tank and some other affiliation
Yeah.
other than their professorship. And so because they're engaged in I apologize to the academic community that they are engaged in real world practical problem sets and solutions, that they end up seeing that there is a demand and being able to include things that they're doing in their day job into the classroom and start to develop that workforce. So that's why it's really important to have people seeing and exposed to more than just um, one view and having professors that have the time and flexibility to go and engage in the corporate world or in government, depending on where they sit and what they're doing and all of that.
So as we talk about building, this as an academic discipline, of course, there has to be something to study, and that includes data. And we've talked a lot over the last couple of webinars about the difficulty of information sharing, and what a nasty problem that is. So how do you see that being resolved, as we start to turn this into something more to study?
I wish there was an easy answer for this one, having been here with you just a few months ago talking about the information sharing problem.
Yeah, that was your article.
Right. Um, in the studying and from an academic perspective, coming up with case studies and looking back, hindsight's 2020, is not going to be that hard to um, for professors and students to come up with what I would call indications and warnings, right? So what do you need to look for that led to this event that's well documented in literature? Um, the problem with those case studies in any discipline is almost that the second that you highlight them as a pathway from intent to effect, is that pathway likely won't be followed again because now it's been exposed.
Mhm.
So the evolution of those case studies and the amount of data accessible, both from the government sharing information that it has and companies, which is what that article was about, the information part before, sharing what information they had leading up to those events, they likely weren't collecting it because it wasn't on their radar. So what have they started collecting now, and how do we make sure that that's um, either standard practice across businesses, just like submitting tax documents. Not that I'm advocating that data is tax information. Um, but being able to think about formalizing in some way the way that those business practices happen so that it is compatible and that we are able to draw those lines of connectivity from this is the information that we had leading into, and this is the effect. It might not be the information might not be the cause, might not show us the cause or the intent behind how that information shifted,
Mhm.
but it at least is a signal to say that these things are what's driving this effect. Um, and so from the information sharing and how that's then taught is really about a culture shift in practice and less about um, uh, using different software tools to do the analysis.
When you say culture shift, what do you mean?
Thinking about who, how, when I share information, rather than um, the propensity to keep it all to myself. It's let me make this more widely available in for the greater good.
Yeah. I mean, there are business school case studies, of course. And how do you think that this would differ, right, from like an international business class, maybe that's particularly conscious of these situations
Sure, and
like that. It's maybe more business focused, but
yeah, and as an easy first step, it's probably not recreating new case studies,
yeah,
right? It's let's leverage
teaching them
what
in a different way.
yeah, or teaching it in the same way, adding yet another dimension, expand it out to another lecture, expand it out through a different dimension that hadn't been analyzed. Think about the risks differently to the company, to the host country, to the supply chain associated with that. And when you start to expand the bubble of the effect of that company within country, and that case study, you can almost make an entire 14-week course around one case study, right? Um, which isn't unheard of, but it that takes a lot of digging into for a set of students to truly understand. Um, and that's perhaps another way of thinking about it is it takes that long to fully understand the implications of some of the challenges with economic security.
Mhm. So I want to talk about this kind of university problem from a couple different ways. So starting with just the business case decision to start a new program in economic security, you kind of bring it up in the article, but I wasn't sure about the answer. So what answer do you have? Like speaking to a university board or a specific department to say, hey, why should you open this new degree program or offer more classes? What's the incentive there? Especially because I think, as people have brought up before, we're facing declining enrollment. Universities are having research budget squeeze. There's a lot of, negative demand signals just for a degree in general.
hmm I think that's also part or a big, I know, not just I think, that was a big motivating factor of my recommendation to look at the professional development and graduate school
Yeah.
degrees programs first. Um, partially because uh, that's where we need the attention most right now to answer the short-term
Practically
problem
right now.
versus the long-term problem. The incentive for professors is different than the incentive for the university, right? And to your point about the squeeze on funding and um, the lowered enrollment, professors are facing a really interesting time that they haven't had in this country in 60 or more years. Um, and the opportunity for those that are willing to stick it out as good academics and professors is that the field is so underrepresented that almost anybody from any degree program has the opportunity to talk about economic security as it relates to their explicit field. In any of the hard sciences, in mathematics, there's plenty to model and simulation.
Mhm.
You've seen all of the other fields and things that we've talked about. So there's so much space to um, make a name for themselves as a professor and having some thought leadership in their field as it relates to economic security. So that's the kind of the personal incentive. But they're not going to be funded for it. So they're going to do this in their free time, as many professors do a lot of writing in their, in quotes, free time. Preferably, they'd be funded for it, right? But that's not going to be written into any grant program, really, anytime soon.
Yeah.
You're seeing some of it come out of industry or foundation funding to talk about economic security. And that's great. And some of that will go to universities and some of that will go um, across the rest of industry to fund all sorts of um, good kind of basic level or applied level research in the topic. Um, from the dean's perspective, it brings a new reputation. It brings notoriety. It shows that this interdisciplinary, interconnected world that everybody's been talking about for 15, 20 years, everything needs to be interdisciplinary. Everybody needs to be well-rounded. This is that example. You want to show that you're a forward-leaning, um, ready to prepare your students for the future, and students want to come somewhere that they're not preparing their students for the jobs of today, but it's the jobs of 5 years from now, 4 years from now, hopefully, still graduating in 4 years. That those deans, presidents of universities have the foresight to say, this is where we need to be in the future. Let's start now.
Mhm.
By waiting for the future to be here, it's too late to start educating those students for the jobs that will be on the market in a few years from now.
So you brought up a lot there that I want to return to at a certain point. But first, before we get into everything else, you know a couple of, programs in DC. I think it's Bush School has an economic security
Yep.
program, as does Johns Hopkins and Georgetown. Are there any academics there that you love their work and you just want to shout them out?
I am not going to be biased and shout out any one individual because I know I would forget so many.
Okay.
But I will take the opportunity, just as I say that, I'm countering myself, to talk about the Economic Statecraft Summit that we have used as a platform to talk about the workforce issues and to really drive a community and develop a community of people. And that's co-hosted with the Institute, with Potomac Institute, with the Bush School, with Texas A&M and their economic statecraft program. So they have been a huge partner to the Institute in creating that as a more formal way and participating to workshop and structure content by people that are living and breathing these economic security challenges day in and day out.
And all of those programs are pretty much DC based. How can, I guess, we kind of spread the word outside of the Beltway? I'm from the Midwest, so I would love to see people in the Midwest, people on the West Coast especially, around those ports, like more aware of some of these problems. So do you have any, I guess, just ideas off the top of your head?
Yeah, so one of the areas that I didn't mention as part of the degree programs was in um, the manufacturing and supply chain. And there's now
Yeah.
full programs that are
There's
dedicated,
one in Iowa.
yeah,
Yeah.
to supply chain management.
Yeah.
And so that's a place for the Midwest to really think about how they can engage in that conversation. It actually it's more of a production supply chain. I don't want to say more, but I'm going to say it. It's more of a problem in the day-to-day operations for those companies and those universities than it is for Wall Street. It's a Wall Street problem, don't get me wrong. But it really so it's not just a East Coast,
Mhm.
Northeast type challenge. And on the West Coast, they have a very different uh, state to not literally also California, but um, the programs out there have a very different focus on I'll use the Silicon Valley Bay Area as an example. The major universities there are focused on tech development,
Of course.
but tech development and the IP security and capturing uh, any capital to go and create their company has major implications on economic security.
Mhm.
And so in teaching students, which a lot of them drop out and go create companies, cool, I got it. But at least instill in them in that first year or two to understand that there are capital risks that they need to prepare themselves for, and that not everybody that's willing to give you money is in it for the sake of your of
Yeah.
you making a dollar or them themselves making a dollar.
I mean, just a couple months ago, there was a VC that was very actively a Russian front for
Yes.
money that was,
I,
giving out money to deep tech companies and people were
and
taking
we've
it.
seen it for 2 decades
Yeah.
where foreign adversarial capital is going in and taking advantage of the US innovation ecosystem. It is very well documented. We know a lot of the tips and cues on how to go look for it now, but it hasn't always been obvious to
Mhm.
those that are starting the companies.
So I do want to pick on something that you said, which is that, even if people, there will be people that will leave university to go do big things, start a company, go work, I guess, in the federal government, like whatever have you. So what lessons, what general impacts beyond those that you stated, do you hope that some foundational classes in economic statecraft will have on the next generation? Because chances are, right, the next person in the White House won't be someone that grew up with a economic statecraft background. So like at what level?
Chances are really high of that.
I would
Nobody
say.
has that background. Um, You know, the principles are still being really iterated and refined. And I don't want to speak on behalf of all of the economic security or economic statecraft community.
Of course.
But I will say that some of those are uh, is I can liken it back to cybersecurity of be wary
Mhm.
of both of what you're seeing and can I take it at face value, right? And this is to a more kind of personal level when you open your email and you've got a phishing email that comes in, you might not necessarily see a banner because personally on your own personal email, you don't that there's no um, s- software that's running to say whether or not this is safe or not. It hasn't been filtered necessarily. Um, and you have to do some due diligence yourself to understand if this is real. And it might look like it came from Microsoft or Google, but you might not be sure. So it's that take a pause, take a beat, think about what I'm seeing. Um, and if we can instill that level of critical thinking across those dimensions that intersect with economic security, that's probably one of the biggest things that we can instill. And it's not just in economic security or even the more standard, I would say, cybersecurity example that I brought up, but it's across every domain and social media and everything of don't always believe what you're seeing. I don't know if I can always trust the data coming off of my manufacturing line because I don't know if it's been tampered with. So what other checks do I have to make sure?
Well, I love the information security kind of side segue that we've done. But back to academia. So we were joking about this before the webinar, but as you write it, academia runs on earning tenure, citations, and status. So as we are building, the next generation of people who can teach economic statecraft, what is an incentive for staying in the field in academia rather than taking a payout and going to work at a major bank or a large international company or for the government? Why stay in academia, especially now?
Especially now, and I will say I'm a really bad microphone for academia because I'm a failed academic. I really intentionally chose not to stay in academia, not to go on and be a
Yeah.
professor. I'm sorry, Dr. Rikita. But I had to break that news to my dissertation committee as I was going to defend and had a job offer to graduate and go and take a job. The incentives depend on the person. Rather, the motivation to stay in a job at academia depend on the person and their interests and their view of what they want for themselves,
Mhm.
right? So the incentives are real of publish or perish, find money to sustain your research and your work, and the credibility that that lands you. So there's a lot of kind of personal motivation things that if people find them motivating, they'll stay in academia because it's a natural fit for them.
Mhm.
Um, I'll use Dr. Welter as an example, who is somebody that has a day job and he has an Air Force Reserve job, and yet he's also a professor and a dad. Um, that he felt so compelled by the things that he has learned and experienced to go back and teach it to the next generation. And the compensation that he gets for teaching is nothing compared to, right? And so the people that are willing to do it are going to do it for the sake of national security when it comes down to it, right?
Mhm.
Or the sake of the common good. Um, the bigger part, I think, is for those that aren't drawn to the academic community of um, from the business world to go back to teach. How are we going to incentivize those that have lived that real world experience inside those companies that have seen economic security measures in action or that have seen the challenges that not having that robust view can arise with other issues or other examples of things that we weren't able to catch, right?
Mhm.
Getting them back into a professor mindset of sharing their experience is going to require outreach from the university professors to go and engage with them in that community.
Yeah, I mean, at any business school, there are a ton of retired practitioners, but there are so many companies and so many CFOs and so many COOs that there's just a larger pool to draw from, I guess.
Right. And they don't need to be a full-time professor or full-time academic. They can do it part-time and still share that back. And that's what this economic security um, foundation really needs is the people that have looked at it.
Yeah, so there's the teaching side of academia, but we haven't talked as much about the research side.
Mhm.
And maybe I'm a little biased, intern before to UARC, and so I'm aware that there is a lot of government sponsoring of research programs, especially those in this area that are, helpful to the national interest. Um, but we are in a little bit of a different world than we were a couple years ago. So I think that also maybe requires a pitch to government of why to fund these sorts of research
Yeah.
programs, studies. So why should the government keep investing in this, and not just keep, hiring guys from Wall Street and bringing them in to run their programs?
So let me give a shout out to a DARPA program. The nascent program at DARPA is investing in the challenge of defining economic security, economic statecraft. And it's a, I could go and sell that program until the cows come home, but and I'm not biased and I don't have any funding from them, whatever. But the entire idea is it's DARPA hard because nobody else has almost the guts to do it. Like it is so, um, it's so broad and nuanced at the same time that it takes a special kind of person to come up with the program to show success, that this really can be a discipline. And so the government is thinking, but typically about funding these programs. But when you see, I'll even use an example with AI, and that while the government has programs that are funding specifically AI research, most of the government programs that are funding AI research are under existing umbrellas of research portfolios where they've added an AI component.
Okay.
So, the if you were to do a search on how much research is going towards AI, it depends on what search engine you're using and how it's filtering it. But if it's specifically only coded AI, it's a much smaller percentage of the entire bucket
Mhm.
of funding that's going towards
Yeah.
developing
Versus
AI.
AI's risks or effects on certain sectors, what have
Right,
you. Yeah.
right. And so I would use that as an example of ways that economic security or economic statecraft could be funded in the future is to embed aspects of security on the existing research portfolios that exist that are being funded today.
And what is, beyond DARPA,
Yep.
like what are some of the what's a government capacity in business research or economic research? Like what is already out there, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that I'm going to get all of these answers right, so I apologize.
Yeah.
But even so basic research at its core is typically funded by Department of Defense is the major funder. NSF has a major investment, but so do every other agency department. Oh, and HHS, Health and Human Services, has the biggest portion of basic and applied research funding
Mhm.
through health, right?
NHS.
Yeah. NIH and probably has the most of it. So then, but so does Department of Justice. and so does Department of Commerce. They all have this research grant funding opportunities. And some of this is probably a shift, is going to require a shift in their mentality about what they're releasing. Um, and also, I would say that professors that want to focus on the security part might be able to embed the security aspects into what they're already pitching to existing programs.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you if that will be an edge up for them or not. But if I were there, I would be looking for every opportunity to expand the breadth of what I'm proposing to meet national interest needs.
Okay. Well, I want to spend the remainder of our time talking about some of the recommendations that you have. Um, and you have three recommendations, which is rewarding interdisciplinary teams, incorporating economic statecraft into academic programs, and then incentivizing more academic and practitioner collaboration. But first, I do want to ask about demand. So we know that there are people that are getting hired for economic statecraft jobs, especially at the department right now. But let's say that you are graduating with a degree in economics or international business. What sorts of jobs exist for you right now?
Mm, they don't. I mean, the regular jobs that you're looking for exist. I
Yeah,
mean, you can't
working at
find, sure.
yeah,
You can't go and
international, yeah.
find enough economists to fill the economist gaps
Okay.
that we have in the country right now. Um, so many of them were the picked off for government use. It was funny. There was like no economists in the government, and then all of a sudden, like every team has two economists.
Okay.
Um, but it that shows how important that
Okay.
degree was, right? I'd say that the jobs that have been out for people graduating in international affairs with a business degree, with a economics degree, all of those are still the entry level positions. And the security is going to be a layer or a level on top today. In the future, the idea behind all of this economic security is that security will be baked in to each of those degrees at some level, that the graduates, whether undergrad or graduate school, are coming out with an appreciation or an understanding for security vulnerabilities or infractions and have some language to articulate the risk associated with the investment, with that business decision, with whatever it might be. Um, and I lost what I was going to say. Back to
Well,
you.
interdisciplinary teams.
Yes.
Something we haven't talked a ton about is the military, Department of Defense. From a military angle, what sorts of jobs, what needs to happen in order to start bringing on the right types of people, beyond the specialized units or teams that the department is starting to create now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Most of the all of the services encourage continued education.
Yep.
They'll go through um, National Defense University. They'll go through somewhere and get a master's degree. There's a zillion different military university schools that they could go and do that. And they are focused on economic security. So you're seeing that I wouldn't say focused. They have an appreciation for.
Eisenhower, yeah.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And the other side of that is if we're recruiting into the military, we shouldn't necessarily expect anybody coming in um, for active duty service to have any appreciation for economic security. However, if we are going out and recruiting for reservists, there are a slew of people out there, as you mentioned, the CEOs, COOs, CFOs galore to go back and teach.
Business operators for
Yeah,
whatever they call it, yeah.
yep. There's a lot of people out there that can become reservists or um, use their day job to help the military through national security. So there's other ways of doing it. The bond program is one, but also in how we generally allocate the time of the reservists of, okay, well, they have this as their day job. Let's make sure that that ties to what they're going to be doing for us during their reserve duty.
Hmm.
Like better allocation of the resources that we have
Yeah.
is just one way to answer today's challenges, let alone in the future.
It's a great answer.
Thanks.
Um,
I'm going to go back to something because I had lost train of thought, but on the interdisciplinary teams and rewarding interdisciplinary teams. One of the ways to think about that all the way from academia through major, let's think about it this way. In academia, in grant writing proposals or in grant management overall, and on business teams, being able to incentivize those who talk through all of the disparate um, fields or risks associated with whatever they're bringing forward. And so on the academic side, having um, some of the capstone classes as students are graduating from an undergraduate program as an interdisciplinary, not just within that one school, not just within that one college of a larger university, make those interdisciplinary. Make those students figure out who others are and how to work together as a team. Um, from a grant management perspective, reward, meaning fund, those proposals that are showing the different backgrounds that are coming in to tackle one bigger issue together rather than, and it can all be through one university. It doesn't need to be a collaborative cross-university, major, complicated effort. Um, but being able to incentivize and fund the interdisciplinary teams more than the highly trained specialists.
right.
And on the business side, it really comes down to make sure that your teams are well-rounded, not just by personality type, but by the backgrounds that they've had.
Mhm. And I think this flows very well into the next point that you make, which is that economic statecraft should just be better integrated into existing academia.
Mhm.
Um, but there was one thing that was bugging me a little bit. Why is licensing and sort of professionalization of the field necessary? Um, lawyers have to do continuing legal education, stuff like that. Why do we need to create that sort of system for economic statecraft?
In the same way that we had to create it for cybersecurity, in the same way that we have to create it for medical doctors, that the science is constantly changing.
Okay.
The available data will continue to change. The paths to undermine United States national interests will continue to develop. So
Mhm.
having people exposed to recent case studies, having people understand the changing landscape isn't only gained by on-the-job experience, but through some level of intentional exposure and collective engagement as a community.
Okay, but I imagine most of that depends on the government sort of, not that it would be classified, but like declassifying information sharing as we get back to this same kind of idea again. How do
Maybe.
you I guess explain that mechanism a little bit more, please.
Sure. Yeah, I would use some, what's a better way of thinking about this? All right, so medical doctors that have to um, renew their credentials, or nursing, pick what your field, that they can talk about, they cannot talk about explicit patients, but they can talk about the case study of the situation arising around um, that patient's case, right? And so being able to, it doesn't necessarily mean that the government has to open up all of that information for that continued credentialing, but that people are able to talk to and the other challenge is this, is that companies are not going to totally open up all of their data for everybody else to see, right? That was part of, a few months ago. Um, But if you're able to talk through or show the development over time or through some subset of data that you're willing to share and show, then the overall community can learn and absorb more. And it doesn't have to require, and there's consortia and industry associations and all of these other places that they share that type of information.
Mhm.
Doesn't have to be an owned credentialing system by the government. It can be organic grassroots type credentialing.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point that there are a lot of other disciplines that deal with more sensitive, you know, as as you said, you can't share specific legals of a case or a conversation with a client if you're a lawyer, but
Mhm.
you can talk about the generals, and I think you're right.
Yeah.
And so your last recommendation um, was incentivizing more academic and practitioner collaboration. But how, and I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to talk about it a little bit more. Um, how are we going to continue to make sure that the government isn't just pulling the best of the best out of Wall Street, and we are creating a larger workforce beyond these specialized teams that have just, we have probably dozens of really, really smart people on this issue in the Defense Department alone, but building a larger, more sustainable workforce. What is the incentive there?
Yeah. All right. So you said something that I can't help but comment on is that
Please.
government poaching the best and the brightest to do what
Fantastic. Yeah. Which is what we should be doing.
which would be great if we could, but we
Yeah.
can't in any other discipline. Certainly not in what's come front of the news of in AI or in semiconductors or in, a lot of these critical technology investment areas where the government doesn't can't compete salary wise, or with enough incentives to bring in the best and brightest. It doesn't mean that we don't have some of the best and brightest, but we certainly don't have them lined up out the door, to be able to pull the next one in. I want to caveat that with the incentive for people to come work for the federal government or work in the national security enterprise to do economic statecraft or economic security will be those that are already motivated by serving their country.
Mm.
Doesn't mean military, but it means serving their country, being a civil servant. Um, on the industry side, I think that that job um, is going to go one of two ways. And it's either going to be a fully appreciated C-suite, um, uh, as critical as marketing, right? Who is incentivized till the cows come home with sales, uh, or as underfunded and somewhat unappreciated of a CIO or CTO's office that doesn't ever have enough money to do all of the cybersecurity that they need.
Okay, so while we are having this discussion, what does success in 1 year, 5 year, 20 year time frame look like? We'll start with 1 year.
All right. Um, the 1 year is a general appreciation that we need the workforce. And I think in the small knit community that we've built on economic security and economic statecraft coming to the summit, there is no question that we want and need more people to understand it. But having it mentioned in every degree program that is connected in some way to economic security, mentioned through their coursework at least once through a semester,
Yeah.
is a great goal for year one. I don't know if that's attainable. I think it should be.
I think so too.
Um, and then just bringing awareness to the issue that more people have to be thinking about this.
Okay. Now 5 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
5 years is having people trained and to say that just like there's a program management certification, a PMP, that there can be some level of certification on economic security, economic statecraft, something along those lines.
Okay.
I don't, again, I don't know if that's necessarily needed, but seeing either students graduating out or having some professional certification,
Yeah. It's something to aspire to.
yeah,
Yeah.
is something that um, there's at least a checkbox, like a verified
Hmm.
checkbox next to somebody.
I know supply chain certainly has that,
Absolutely.
which is a huge workforce differentiator between students and stuff like that. And it's
Yep.
a good signal for companies
Right.
about how serious someone is. So
Yep.
20
Um,
years.
20 years, we better not be having this discussion. 20 years, I'd say it's literally an entire generation, right? So I'll use cyber AI, cell phones, information technology broadly, that the kids that were brought up with iPhones around them all the time naturally communicate differently,
Yeah.
organically communicate differently. So 20 years from now, we better be talking about economic security in a totally different mindset, probably not even using those same words anymore. And it should be built in from our core of who we are
Mhm.
in the in national security overall.
Well, I think that is a great place to transition into a very short Q&A. So we had a question come in that said, at what point will academics and practitioners alike begin talking about China and Russia as the economic threats that they are in class? So just a quick one shot.
Yeah, I don't know when and how they might do that. I will say the challenge behind many of them doing that is some of the foreign funding that's coming into those universities.
Yeah.
So to expect professors to speak out against those that are funding them is a non-starter.
And students in their class.
And students in their
Too.
classes, professors, despite what we're seeing in academia today, are typically not um, those that are willing to fight the uphill battle, right? They're not totally willing to go and speak out against and risk their reputation on it too. So I wish I could be more hopeful and to say that'll be sooner than later, but I can't I can't say that.
Yeah. Well, we're just at time. Any closing thoughts, I guess, to our audience?
Um, I this might be the last specific topic article that comes out. We've got one more kind of summing everything up of one more
Uh-huh.
article on the entire doctrine of what needs to be included. And I, for one, feel like we've covered so much content, but there's so much more that needs to be said and needs to be explored.
What's something else that you're thinking about that you wish that you covered in the series?
Um, you asked a question earlier about what are the incentives for businesses to go and potentially fund these or to what's their buy-in on it.
Mhm.
And while it is their financial viability as a company, I think that there's a lot more that we haven't explored there from a corporate America side.
Yeah.
Um, so that's as Potomac Institute looks at this intersection of business and government. We spent a lot of time talking about the government side and not as much time talking about the business side. So I think we haven't done a fair nod to their role in all of this. And but I'm really looking forward to seeing the final paper come through and presenting this as an entire um, series set and book at the summit coming up in October. So that's kind of where I am with all of this. It has been wonderful working with you through
I've had
not
a
just
blast. We still have one more. So
I know. I don't know I'm closing out. But personally, this is my
yeah.
last time on stage with you. And it's been great. So thank you so much for all of your support and coordinating through us.
Well, thanks to you guys. It's been fun. And we have covered a ton of ground. You did most of my job for me at the end here. But yes, we have one more article left that Tim Walter is writing.
Yes.
And it will be on economic statecraft and how to write a doctrine. So we are very excited for that. It will be quite summative. So we'll have one more briefing.
Yeah.
Until then, we will see you next time.